The words are enshrined in American culture, and there's no doubt the refugees fleeing war in Syria are tired and poor. But do they truly yearn to breathe free?
Are they coming because they want to be a part of republicanism, part of that American spirit? No.
What happened in Europe is nothing but a preview as to what's coming to the United States.
Witness the disturbing trend of rape gangs ruling the streets of Germany.
They look at European girls as asking for it.
I think that many of these young males view Western women essentially as the spoils of war.
This is Germany's experience with immigrants who refuse to assimilate. That's spreading throughout Europe.
Why? Because Islamic law is against assimilation.
And it's already playing out in the United States.
They come to Europe, and they're coming to America, and they see all these women who are not veiled and who are infidels. They're fair game.
In America, we're starting to see sexual assaults, rapes, honor killing, and it's going to be here to stay.
Thanks to policies launched by the pro-mass immigration leftists who are more concerned about their image than the safety of hard-working Americans.
In pursuit of this globalist agenda, they're running roughshod over the will of the people, inundating our countries with these migrants who have this supremacist, violent, and authoritarian worldview, who are victimizing our young people.
And they're doing it with the support of big businesses, taking advantage of taxpayers for cheap labor.
Social transformation without representation. The people never voted for this.
The Sharia and democracy are completely incompatible. There's no compatibility because the Sharia believes that the Western democratic system has to be overthrown.
Scared yet? You should be, because the problems in Europe are coming to America.
Michelle Malkin investigates. Now, here's Michelle Malkin.
It's one of the biggest horror stories that so-called mainstream journalists don't want to talk about, because those who do are branded bigots, racists, and Islamophobes. But whether it's on the front pages of America's leading newspapers or not, it's happening and it's real. Migrants from the Middle East and Northern Africa swarming into Europe by the millions are draining social services, committing crimes, and changing the culture. I'm a child of legal immigrants, but I'm against open borders and indiscriminate immigration. The latest waves of Muslim refugees aren't assimilating. They're forming their own isolated communities, and many are importing radical Muslim culture and practices. A lot of these ideas might have been acceptable where they came from, but are not in any way in the Western world, especially the way they treat women as property and second-class citizens. But the Euro-socialists say, just give them time, education, and programs. Well, how's that working for you, Europe? Western women and children are routinely sexually assaulted at public pools, parks, cemeteries, even music festivals. Sound unbelievable? It's not, although you don't hear about it because the mainstream media is covering it up. But one scholar, Soren Kern, is tracking and compiling local news and police reports of these terrifying incidents.
Just recently, there was a case of a mother who was walking her daughter in a park during the middle of the day, and two migrants ambushed her from behind, and they took turns raping her. And the migrants held the girl and forced her to watch while these two men were raping her own mother. In Dusseldorf, of a 19-year-old Moroccan who raped a 90-year-old woman who was coming out of a mass in a cathedral in downtown Dusseldorf during the middle of the day. German media will refer to these people as dark-skinned people or Southerners or Southlanders. There are many different words, politically correct euphemisms that the German media uses as a way to not use the words Muslim migrant or Middle Eastern migrant.
In what world is this acceptable? The perpetrators are not native. They were not raised with Western values. Yet European politicians knowingly brought these problems across the border, and look what's happened. America, let this be a warning. If we stay the course with mass refugee resettlement, this is only a preview of what's to come.
Across the world, colleagues, family, and friends gather, party, and cheer as they celebrate and ring in the new year together. But in Cologne, Germany, that party turned into a nightmare in 2016. At first, German officials said nothing. But eventually, there were so many reports, so many cell phone videos, that they couldn't cover it up any longer. Cologne Mayor Henriette Recker addresses it 1 year later.
Natürlich auch immer an die im vorigen Jahr angegriffenen Frauen, und ich wünsche ihnen, dass sie die schlimmen Erfahrungen schon überwinden konnten.
But just how many women are we talking about? Reports varied and changed. At one point, Reuters cited 121. USA Today, more than 600. But now some are saying as many as 1,500 women were assaulted that frightening evening in Cologne.
If it wasn't for people who had their cell phone video footage of these assaults in the front of the Cologne train station on New Year's Eve, the German authorities would have done their best to keep it completely sealed and silent from the German public.
Soren Kern is a dual U.S. and German citizen who is a senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, which focuses on Middle East issues and the Islamization of the West.
In Cologne, New Year's Eve 2016, there were mass assaults of women by migrants. It wasn't just in Cologne, but it was in Hamburg and Stuttgart and Hanover and many different cities across the country. This was shocking to the German public because of the scale.
So who were these men? Let's take a look at some of the media's descriptions. Half of them foreign nationals who had only recently arrived in Germany, from the Washington Post. The Independent out of the UK wrote, North African or Arab descent. The New York Times, newly arrived asylum seekers and many other immigrants. Kern says they're most likely also Muslim, judging from where they came from and how they attacked these women. But few people would dare say that out loud.
Essentially, it was a Arabic rape game called Taharush Gameya. Essentially, it's a practice in many Muslim countries where large groups of Muslim males surround individual women and begin to sexually assault them.
A game for some, terror for others. And this doesn't surprise Nani Darwish, a woman who experienced sexual harassment by Muslim men growing up in Egypt.
Gender is very important in Islamic law. The laws that apply to men are very different from laws that apply to women. Men have more rights legally under the law.
Darwish, a former Muslim, moved to the United States as an adult. She can never return to Egypt because of death threats against apostates.
And this is my mother and myself, a baby, and my sister. And it's a little hard for me to look at these pictures because, unfortunately, my mom no longer talks to me. They have stopped talking to me because I became Christian and also because I'm advocating peace with Israel.
She knows what it feels like to have men treat her poorly, just because she is a woman.
Women are viewed as second-class citizens legally and socially and culturally. When I was walking in Cairo, and I was wearing Western clothes, really. And if you're walking in the crowded street, you'll be pinched, you'll be groped all the time. Why? Because you're a woman walking by yourself. A proper woman is covered and she's protected with men. Women who are not covered and not protected by a male companion is asking for it.
Because Darwish understands how these extreme Muslim immigrants were raised, she isn't surprised to hear the New Year's Eve assaults in Cologne weren't part of an isolated event.
It shows you the cultural gap between how women are viewed.
So why is the media just now covering it? The simple answer? Censorship. The German press has a self-regulating agency for journalists. As a general rule, they don't report the identity, the nationality, or the religious background of a particular perpetrator in sexual assault.
There was a German newspaper that reported that a woman was assaulted in Vienna, in Austria, and that 3 of the perpetrators were Afghan. The German press agency sanctioned this newspaper for reporting on the nationality of the 3 perpetrators who committed the rape, because it said that it was discriminatory. They used the words subject these people to second-class status. So you see, political correctness is taken over rational thinking in Germany on this migration issue. And it's more important in many of these European countries, particularly in Germany, to protect the identity or the religious background of the perpetrators than it is to protect the women and children, German citizens. Well, this situation is perverse in any way that you try to examine it.
Kern has spent years collecting and analyzing data so he can figure out what's really going on in Germany.
You usually find out about these incidents if you read the local newspapers or if you read the local police reports. What Gatestone has done is really tried to connect the dots by putting together thousands of reports of sexual assaults from all across Germany. When you look at it on a month-to-month basis, it's just a nationwide, massive assault on German women and children.
And it's not just Germany. These problems are happening all over Europe. Women being assaulted and raped while the government and mainstream media cover it up because whistleblowers are branded as Islamophobes and racists.
There's a very real possibility of civil war in a lot of these European countries, particularly in France and in Germany. People want to know about Islam in Europe. You know, a lot of things going on over there, a lot of changes in European society. And I think there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of inaccurate information. You know, mainstream media really doesn't want to report on the issue of the rise of Islam in Europe. So thankfully we have things like Michelle Malkin or the Gatestone Institute, alternative sources of analysis to help people really understand the magnitude of the changes taking place in Western civilization.
The changes date back to World War II. A whole generation of European men wiped out. So countries like Germany brought in migrants to fill jobs like factory workers. Many were Muslim men and their families who never really integrated into European culture. Within the last few years, floods of refugees have poured into Europe from Northern Africa and the Middle East, particularly Syria. Germany absorbed 1.5 million migrants in 2 years under the direction of Chancellor Angela Merkel.
I think Angela Merkel was very afraid that if she refuses to allow these people into the country, if she seals the borders, it would really spell the beginning of the end of the European Union. So I think she didn't really understand the magnitude of the implications of allowing all these people into the border, but I think it really had less to do with humanitarian sensibilities than it did with the future of the European project.
The public is slowly catching on and getting angry, criticizing and protesting Merkel's nonsensical immigration policies that are putting her people in danger.
This is why Angela Merkel right now is having a major problem in running for her re-election.
Brigitte Gabriel is the founder of Act for America, the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan grassroots national security organization.
People were shocked, people were stunned that this is happening, the refugees that we took in Germany. I mean, Germans went out of their way. Germany took in more refugees than any other European nation. That's when the mayors of the cities tried to cover it up.
Watch what happens in this meeting in a small German town when a man tells the mayor his granddaughter has been sexually harassed by refugees.
Ganz einfach, indem wir das nicht provozieren, dort nicht entlang fällt.
Oh, in sein eigenes Land! In seine eigene Stadt darf man nicht mehr! Ah, Junge!
They were afraid of the fear that will be struck in the hearts of the population in Germany, because almost every city and every place right now has Muslim refugees that the government forced down their throats.
So the government covered it up, made excuses, lame attempts at educating migrants by doing things like creating a, wait, get this, a poster and flyer to educate refugees that they shouldn't touch women in public pools. Are you kidding me? In what world is that okay? A poster? How about a prosecution?
What we have now is with this mass migration of essentially unassimilatable people, you have a real breakdown in law and order in many parts of Germany. The Gatestone Institute has documented sexual assaults in cemeteries, in parks, in swimming pools, in malls, in bike paths, people coming out of church. I mean, every single aspect of German life that was at one point safe is no longer safe.
Up next, Europe's refugee rape epidemic. The cycle of sexual violence is spiraling out of control. Can anything be done to stop the surge from reaching our shores? When we come back, part 2 of our investigation.
The United States of America is great not because of government, not because of social engineering, not because of politicians and bureaucrats and redistribution of wealth, because of you. You want to talk about blood on hands and violence, pal? Then let's talk about it. But right now, you're making an ass out of yourself. Of course Russia's behind it. They hacked into the Pentagon. They've hacked into the State Department. They've hacked into the Office of Personnel Management. They're hacking throughout our government. Tip. His father said, I think my son's a terrorist. That's a pretty damn good tip.
Let's revisit that last statement. Every single aspect of German life that was at one point safe is no longer safe. This is terrifying. Why are more German people not revolting? Why aren't they telling their government these policies are unacceptable and vote out their chancellor? Here's one theory. They have no idea how large scale this problem is because, as we heard, government officials and the mainstream media are covering it up. But get this, it isn't only happening in Germany. There are stories like this all throughout Europe. How about the women and girls sexually assaulted at a music festival in Sweden? Have you heard of this? It was being kept under wraps until they couldn't anymore. When the New Year's attacks exposed the problem, police in Sweden reluctantly investigated, and what they found is shocking. Sexual assaults at music festivals, street carnivals, and New Year's Eve celebrations. Almost all of the perpetrators were from Afghanistan, Eritrea, and Somalia. The Gatestone Institute dug through the reports and found 10 cases where groups of men surrounded girls as young as 12 and played the rape game we saw in Cologne, Taharush Gameya, which is Arabic for collective harassment. Women and girls filed reports, so at least they caught the bad guys, right? Wrong. All investigations into attacks at 2 different festivals were dropped. Not enough evidence and trouble IDing suspects. Oh, and get this. That comprehensive police report has no recommendations, as in 0, that the country should slow the flow of refugees. How about Austria? It's spread there too. In 2015, almost 1 out of 3 refugees in Vienna were accused of committing crimes, according to the Austrian Interior Ministry. Just one disturbing example is of an Iraqi man who raped a 10-year-old boy at a public pool, saying it was, quote, a sexual emergency. With all this trouble in Europe and the influx of immigrants into the United States, we have to ask ourselves, is it coming to America or is it already here?
Former President Barack Obama claimed that restricting immigration to protect national security is offensive and contrary to American values. No Limits liberals have attacked common sense proposals for heightened visa scrutiny, profiling, and immigration slowdowns as, quote, un-American. I think our founding fathers would be appalled.
They wanted to prevent individual states from flooding the rest of the Union with immigrants that they believed wouldn't assimilate. That's why they gave it over to the feds. They didn't give it over to the feds to screw over the states and say, we are going to forcibly transform you, seed your communities with security risks, change your culture, strain your social services and your education, your hospitals.
Daniel Horowitz is a senior editor at Conservative Review.
Immigration, at its core, is to benefit those already in the country. When you bring in large quantities from societies that are fundamentally incompatible with Western civilization, you have a cumulative problem. The individuals coming will never assimilate in large numbers.
But like always, Obama said to hell with our founders. He ditched our sovereignty and safety for left-wing spin. Obama welcomes thousands of refugees for a better life. What a nice line for his memoirs, but real life will tell a different tale than his narcissistic autobiography, and already has.
What Obama's been doing is what I warn in my book about social transformation without representation, where he abuses existing laws, expands upon laws, in some cases pushes over the statutory authority to go and socially engineer this country into an entity that it really never was. Refugee resettlement has become a de facto Muslim resettlement program from the Middle East.
In fiscal year 2016, Obama set a record for allowing in almost 40,000 Muslim refugees. Nearly half of the refugees admitted, according to the Pew Research Center.
Now, the problem is, if you look at the refugee statutes, they were designed for persecuted ethnic and religious minorities. Now, say what you want about Syria, Somalia, some of these Middle Eastern countries that are pretty miserable places to live, but these individuals do not qualify as a persecuted minority.
Many of the refugees are posing as persecuted when they are really economic migrants, not people who want to embrace Western values and the American spirit.
In the fall of 2016, an Iraqi refugee was arrested and prosecuted on terrorism charges for giving material support to ISIS. One of the things he said is that America will not isolate me from my Islamic duty.
Europe did a lot of programs for assimilation. Why aren't the Muslims in Europe assimilating? I'm sure that many of them are. But the problem is they get ostracized by their community. Why? Because Islamic law is against assimilation.
They basically built their own little communities within Europe. So instead of assimilating and respecting their women and giving their women right to an education, they kept their women exactly from whatever original country they came from. And that's why they were not assimilating. Our value system is 100% opposed to anything they stand for. And that's why they cannot assimilate, and they will never assimilate unless they shed their culture and unless they shed their Islamic belief. They're not going to be able to treat women as equals.
They're not going to assimilate. Quite the contrary. They think their values are superior to ours. And so they're going to work to impose theirs upon us.
Dr. Robert Spencer is an author and the director of Jihad Watch.
In Islam, it's permissible to take infidel women and use them as sex slaves. It sounds unbelievable. It sounds like some sort of a lurid invention of evil-minded Islamophobes, but it's real.
And we're already seeing it happen right here on our shores. But perhaps you haven't heard of the horror and hush-up in Twin Falls, Idaho. There was only a small blurb reported locally as a sexual assault investigation. But it wasn't until conservative-leaning sites and organizations like Act for America and the Refugee Resettlement Watch blog pushed it onto Drudge that we got real details, untethered from the constraints of political correctness. Reports of rape at knife point by migrant children, followed by the urination on a mentally disabled 5-year-old girl. After a groundswell of social media attention, the police and prosecutor's office were forced to respond. Here's all they would confirm. There was a group of boys aged 7, 10, and 14 from Sudanese and Iraqi families, which are predominantly Muslim. 2 were charged. 1 is alleged to have touched the girl, and there is a video of the sexual assault. They are denying there was a knife and not calling it a gang rape. But we can't confirm that because they're minors and the case is sealed. Predictably, some national media expressed more outrage about citizen journalists who covered the story than they did about the horrible crime.
What's ensued has been shameful in the sense of denial, cover-up, outright lies from Idaho authorities, and even a warning from the Idaho State Attorney that derogatory comments about the perpetrators could be prosecuted.
How about the case in Lowell, Massachusetts, where 22-year-old Syrian refugee Imad Hasso was arrested after following a 13-year-old girl at a public swimming pool, repeatedly touching her upper thigh, asking her age, even when the girl told him she was a little kid.
Same thing as what we saw happening in Germany. And you see, it's based on the same Islamic principles. She's 13. She said she was too young, but as far as the Muslim migrant is concerned, that's a perfect age, because Muhammad married his wife when she was 9. Actually, he married her when she was 6, consummated the marriage when she was 9. So 13 might be a little old, but it'll do.
Don't forget Germany's answer to stopping the sexual attacks.
It's laughable to think that a Muslim migrant who thinks that he's acting in complete accord with the Word of God is going to see a poster like that and think this is what he ought to do instead.
These aren't the only refugee attacks in the U.S. Let's head over to Utah, where refugee Isar Met was convicted of kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering a 7-year-old girl found bloody and broken in a shower. Or Ashburn, Virginia, where this native of Togo who had only been in the country for 9 days, dragged a woman into the woods and tried to rape her. He's serving 10 years. Or how about this one? A massive Muslim sex trafficking ring busted in Nashville by multi-state and federal agencies. According to the FBI, 29 were initially charged of the primarily Somali refugee gang. In the end, 6 were acquitted and 3 convicted.
I do think that that gang in Tennessee was the first instance of a Muslim rape gang in the United States, and there will be many others.
One witness cried on the stand that the gang made her a prostitute at age 12 in Minneapolis, some nights selling her to Somali men for as little as $40. But I thought these were religious men, reportedly taking breaks for Muslim prayer time. Still think it's a peaceful religion? Let's ask.
There was a Muslim gang raping and sexually abusing young non-Muslim girls. Nobody wants to acknowledge that such an ideology exists or that such beliefs exist in Islam.
I don't think Islam cares about peace at all. The Quran says, why seek peace when you're on top? It's a temporary tactic to become strong again and go back to do jihad.
So what do we do now? Expert Soren Kern fears Europe is too far gone, but America can still stop what happened across the pond.
Dealing with these Islam, non-Islam, Muslim, non-Muslim assimilation problems is a permanent feature of European life, and I think that that can't be reversed, apart from extremely drastic moves, which I would not obviously encourage or promote. I'm a first-generation American. I love this country, and I am very pro-migration. I'm not against migration in any sense of the word, but there needs to be controlled migration. And there needs to be understanding of who is coming into the country, and that the migrants who come into this country share the values of the United States.
Kern advises a temporary ban for countries that promote ISIS. Horowitz also wants a pause in mass refugee resettlement, as we really have no way of vetting the people coming in.
You could resettle 12 times as many people nearby in Arabic countries, in the Gulf countries, which have refused to take in any refugees because the cost is so much less. If you really cared about humanitarianism, you would put in those funds towards local resettlement, regional resettlement.
We need a complete rework of our immigration system, of our terror verifying system, of our watch list system. And this is the exciting thing about having an administration like the Trump administration right now that really can do a whole rebuilding of our counter-terror infrastructure in every way.
I think there has to be some kind of training about the legal system in America, how we respect women here, how women and men have the same equal rights under the law. Because, unfortunately, the West presumes that immigrants understand that, but many of them understand it the hard way after a crime has already happened.
Donald Trump campaigned on what he promised would be sharp departures from policies that both administrations pursued before him. And notably, that's in terms of immigration and in actually daring to say that we're going to have a moratorium on, first he said Muslim immigration, and people said, oh, he backtracked because now he's saying just immigration from terror hotspots. Actually, that's just a method of doing what he always said he was going to do, which is try to prevent jihadis from coming into the United States. The jihad attacker at Ohio State University was born in Somalia, and then he lived in Pakistan. And so if the Trump administration policies had been in place in November 2016, then Abdul Artan may never have been in the country at all.
But it's certainly hard to overturn decades of bad policies when there's so much money and power at stake. Clearly, the Obama administration saw refugees as potential Democratic voters and the way toward a permanent majority, a demographic path to liberal control of the country. Europe has seen it, and now so are American mid-sized cities, stuffed with refugees from wildly different cultures, transforming the local communities and costing taxpayers big bucks. We're the ones paying for each of these refugees, putting a strain on public schools, housing, and health services. And here's the thing. A lot of these refugees are not employable. In Germany, out of the 1.1 million migrants in the country, a Reuters survey found the country's major firms have hired fewer than 100, just 63 refugees by fall 2016, although several responded that they found it discriminatory to ask about an application migration history. In the U.S., charities, nonprofits, and big businesses are cashing in on the racket. There are 9 major contractors. We looked up Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services at usaspending.gov and found nearly $100 million in the past decade. And that's just one example. The Refugee Resettlement Watch website estimates the government is spending at least $1 billion per year on resettlement. And as for those for-profit U.S. corporations, they say they need more cheap labor, especially manufacturing, food processing, and hospitality. It might be cheap for them, but the government is subsidizing their salaries in the forms of housing, food stamps, even corporate tax credits. It's the same thing as outsourcing jobs to foreign companies. Your hard-earned tax dollars are being spent to hire foreigners, sabotaging American jobs. And to think we've just been through a recession. Millions of hardworking Americans were searching for work, and here we are giving it all away to Muslim refugees, undermining our way of life. The fight earlier this year over President Trump's common-sense executive orders to freeze refugee resettlement shows what we're up against. It's not just enemies outside our borders who threaten our safety and security. It's the enemies within, Congress, the courts, and the media who are conspiring against America. Welcome to the social media mailbag. Our episode on the EB5 citizenship for sale scam provoked outrage among viewers. Many of you shared what's going on in your own backyards. On Facebook, Laird Barber commented, "Here in Rockford, Illinois, I think they're using the same program to rehab an old factory downtown into a hotel and conference center. The mayor has gone over to China several times in the last couple of years to solicit Chinese investors. Originally, it was supposed to be done by now, but not much has been accomplished. The company set to build this thing is Gorman Company. They're also constructing a multi-unit housing project on the city's east side." Laird's right. Rockford's Mayor Larry Morrissey has practically made China his second home, along with Wisconsin-based developer Gary Gorman, whose company has been lobbying to rake in tens of millions of dollars through EB5 funding for a riverfront hotel, conference center, and high-rise development project. The boondoggle has dragged on for years. Local residents have yet to see any benefits. But you know who's an investor in this venture? Liberal billionaire Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. For wealthy foreign investors, it's pay to stay. For well-connected real estate moguls and developers, it's pay to play. And when government gets to pick winners, taxpayers usually lose. In our Crapweasel Watch, we call out the political cheaters, government thieves, con artists, frauds, and all-around idiots making America worse. This week, we're targeting a left-wing attorney general, Maura Healey of Massachusetts, who single-handedly decided that a Supreme Court case guaranteeing gun ownership rights wasn't settled law. In just her third year in office, Maura the Menace deliberately misinterpreted the law, making hundreds of thousands of law-abiding citizens virtual felons overnight. These families are now in jeopardy of a 10-year felony conviction for owning firearms that were legal for around 2 decades before this arrogant gun-grabbing AG unilaterally changed the law with no legislative action. Thankfully, 2 gun owner organizations in the state, GOAL, the local NRA affiliate, and the Massachusetts Association of Gun Rights are fighting back against this blatant abuse by filing suit against Healey in federal court. Forget Maura Healey's gun control. What Massachusetts needs is government control. Today's Bulldog Award goes to A.P. Dillon, a modern-day liberty-minded muckraker in North Carolina. Steadfast and vigilant, Dillon goes after corruptocrats from both parties doing exceptional work in the fight against Fed-Ed fools and Common Core tools. She's been the go-to resource for parents in the Tar Heel state, blogging and tweeting truth to Common Core crony power. Dillon's forceful advocacy to opt North Carolina out of Common Core standards is a model for parents sick of privacy-invading, data-mining, top-down Fed-Ed peddlers targeting our kids. Her comprehensive North Carolina Common Core timeline chronicles lawmakers' shady, underhanded efforts to, quote, put lipstick on the Common Core pig. And her writing for StopCommonCoreNC.org is required reading on the Common Core racket. Thank you, A.P. Dillon, for being an unshakable truth-telling bulldog for all the families fed up with Fed-Ed.
Next on Michelle Malkin Investigates.
Billionaire Tom Steyer is a poster boy for the environmental movement. A liberal fat cat who spent tens of millions of dollars of his own money to push his climate change agenda to the political forefront.
He sees himself as sort of a champion, or, he sees himself as literally saving the world.
But Steyer's character has been called into question. Is he really Mr. Save the Planet or Mr. Make Me Richer?
We don't have any idea what Tom Steyer is now making money on through Farallon Capital. And certainly the ongoing success, the ongoing profitability of Farallon Capital, in all likelihood, is going to be down to Tom Steyer's financial benefit one way or another.
Steyer's dead set on shaping the political landscape. Can this climate change crusader be stopped in his tracks?
It's very hard to convince someone that the hundreds of millions of dollars they spent on, literally saving humanity was just a distraction from the issues that Americans really care about.
If you've got a story to share, email me at michelle@michellemalkininvestigates.com. We're so glad you were able to join us and hope you'll stick around for our next edition as we continue our crusade for the truth. On behalf of our entire team, I'm Michelle Malkin. Thanks for watching.